Good morning. So I think prior to Glenn and myself, you heard about demographics. Glenn told you about what's happened with the commission. I will attempt to do some more contextualizing. Actually, it's interesting that we're here talking about this today. I have a legislative plate on my car, and this morning I felt as though I was being trailed by a police officer who eventually drove up to my window and looked at me in a manner that I don't know why he would look at me, and drove past me, which is kind of the way this sometimes happens. And that's with the legislative plate on my car. Here's what I see as context. You know, we talk about fixing this law. That's what we're talking about with the bill we had during the session. We're not talking about introducing a law. We're talking about making fixes to the law so that it actually works. There are people in our community, and I mean the community of Connecticut, who feel as though, although many of us recognize the image of justice as blind with the scales and the sword, that sometimes justice perhaps lifts the blindfold and decides what justice wants to do and who justice is going to be acted upon or not. That's what this is really all about. It's about whether or not things are fair, and what the attempt has been is to figure that out so that we could take the information that should be being gathered, look at it and analyze it and see if people are treated differently. In the session that we just had, there was a lot of opposition to doing that. The opposition wasn't to having the law that doesn't work. The opposition was to putting in place fixes so that we could actually figure out what was going on. And you had all kinds of arguments being made, which, quite frankly, to me made absolutely no sense. Those arguments were about, well, you know, it hasn't worked in the past. Well, that's why we have this bill that's supposed to be fixing this law. You had people telling us that the reason why they made a choice not to do anything was because they recognized that it wasn't going to work, and so why waste their time? And these are law enforcement officers who are tasked with enforcing the law, and this is the law which they should be enforcing. And then you ask questions, well, how do people in certain communities not trust the law? This is not to say that people who are law enforcement officers aren't trustworthy, but it does raise a question in people's minds when they feel as though they are being surveilled, trailed, and then they hear law enforcement officers say things like, well, I don't have to follow the law because I choose not to. This is why you have these questions. And, you know, whether it's a Puerto Rican population going down, Cuban population going up, you have brown people in cars that feel as though people are looking at them because of their race. So this is the context in which we are operating. And what we need to figure out how to fix this law, how to work with all of those who want to fix this law. You know, the Office of Policy and Management, Mike Lawler said he would be willing to help do some of that analysis. So some of the questions that people raised simply to block this, we had answers for. But people did not want this to happen. And by people, I don't just mean people. I mean some people, not all, some people in law enforcement, because they did not want us to see what might happen in some of these departments. That's the truth of the matter. And we don't speak about it in that way, but that's how we have to speak about it, because that's really what this issue is about. This issue is about we have a way, and if we don't, we're working on a way to fix the law that is in place. And what we will learn from having fixed that law is whether or not people feelings are reflective of what really goes on. And look, in terms of what I do as a legislator, I'm in government, and government's number one priority is to, whether people recognize it or not, to provide security to people. And you cannot be secure when you're afraid of the people who are supposed to be enforcing the law. So I think that you might have questions later, so I just wanted to offer that context. And I see that Senator Coleman has come in, so I will turn it over to him.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, Senator Coleman. Hello. Richard Wilson, I'm the chairperson of the committee. Welcome, and thanks for participating in today's events. And I turn over the floor to you for 10 minutes to give us the context of this discussion.
I appreciate the deference to come in. I'm hoping only a couple minutes late, and I do apologize for that. But first off, I want to thank you all for hosting this meeting, and particularly want to thank you for inviting me to be a participant in the sharing of the information on what I believe is a very important and significant subject not only in the state of Connecticut, but probably across the country. And in Connecticut, we probably had some celebrated instances of court cases that call into question the quality of justice that is being administered in the state of Connecticut. Some of you may have heard about the James Tillman case, which has to do with a man who was wrongfully convicted and sentenced and served 18 years before DNA analysis sort of substantiated his innocence. And I bring that case up only to be preliminary to my comment that I think in Connecticut, certainly the gentlemen who are sitting in front of you, and I dare say all of you, as well as probably the vast majority of people in the state of Connecticut, are interested in making sure that the quality of justice that occurs in the state of Connecticut is more than just adequate, but is what it should be. And I guess many of us are concerned about racial profiling in the sense that some law enforcement officials in the state of Connecticut believe it to be a legitimate police technique. And I would take serious issue with that. And I think, at least in private conversations, many meaningful individuals involved in the law enforcement community would also dispute that it is a legitimate police technique. In the state of Connecticut, as Representative Holder-Winfield has indicated, we've made some effort over the last few years, perhaps the last decade. I lose count of how long the Alvin Penn Act has been in existence. But over the last couple of sessions, we've been making efforts to fine-tune the legislation that is in place. And I guess it's unfortunate for me to have to say that we've met with considerable resistance to the effort to fine-tune the law and to make the law actually work. But it's consistent, that resistance is consistent with our efforts on other aspects of law enforcement. And bear in mind, I say that the whole overriding effort is to just make the quality of justice that's administered in the state of Connecticut what it should be. But you meet with the same kind of resistance when you talk about recording of police confessions and as well improving eyewitness identification procedures. And I can only conclude that within the law enforcement community, there is a mindset that is resistant to the whole idea of making the job of law enforcement more difficult, irrespective of what constitutional provisions may provide for or call for or demand. Law enforcement doesn't mind apparently cutting corners and getting to arrest, prosecution, and conviction as quickly as possible without much attention, if any at all, to the possibility that the accused is actually an innocent person. I guess I just want to use whatever remains of my time to talk just a little bit about what has become a celebrated incident in the state of Connecticut.